In your economic growth statement, you specifically have announced a plan to fast-track new gas projects through the Development Facilitation Program. As you know, right now Victorians are facing historic droughts to the west of the state, while many Victorians are facing increased flood, increased fire risk, which is jacking up their insurance premiums. Premier, I ask, how is fast-tracking new gas projects ethical, given the increased climate disasters that Victorians are seeing right now?
Well, in terms of your framing of the question, I won't. I reject your framing of the question, but I won't quibble with it because the facts are, I want to spend more time on why it is important that we have, as part of our transition to renewable energy, why gas, we've been very, very clear that gas has and will continue to be part of our state's energy mix. I mean, it needs to be part of our energy mix. However, I don't think you can deny that no state has done more to drive investment and therefore delivery of renewable energy than Victoria, and an enormous credit goes to Minister D'Ambrosio, who has driven this work for more than a decade, which now sees us getting close to 40% of our state's energy mix being renewable energy. And you mentioned the fast tracking of gas projects in the economic growth statement. What you failed to include is that we're also fast tracking renewable energy projects as well. And just last week, I was with Minister D'Ambrosio and Minister Kilkenny to announce that since we made this decision in April of last year, and we made this decision to include renewable energy projects in our development facilitation program because too many of them were getting stuck in VCAT, causing 2 years of delay, which was delaying the production of renewable energy our state needs. Since we've made that deliberate decision to fast-track renewable energy projects, we've had 13 projects go through that process, $3 billion of investment. And this is renewable energy, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the number from last week, but this is enough renewable energy to power hundreds of thousands of homes. And so I think it's important to, when we have these discussions about our state and our nation's energy mix, that we don't present it in an overtly alarmist way to put people in different corners of the debate. We've got to be sensible about this. Gas is part of our energy mix now and into the future, noting though that it is a diminishing resource. And it's also cheaper to go all electric. That's why we have continued this significant focus on investment in renewable energy alongside, yes, including gas in our fast-tracking approvals, because for many businesses, gas is their option. Gas is their option, but the more we can encourage households and businesses to go all electric, that is making sure that that gas supply is there for those businesses and industries who need it.
On gas, just a bit further, your government's just approved the Viva Gas import terminal. It means you're going to dredge a large chunk of the Corio Bay, all to import gas well into our state's future. Our own climate laws mean we have to hit net zero by 2045. So can I ask, has your government received departmental briefings on the net zero impact of that decision?
Well, again, I emphasise the point I made earlier that we are on track for our renewable energy targets by having 40% of our energy mix being renewable energy by the end of this year. In terms of your comments, though, around the process, the processing of the facility. This announcement last week came following an extensive environmental effects statement process. And as we all know, EES processes are extensive, they're independent, they're led by experts. And ultimately, the balance of that process, the advice that went to the Minister was that this was a project that should be approved, which was why it was subsequently approved by the Minister.
Premier, does your government have any evidence that you can provide to the committee that opening more gas projects can still get us to net zero in 20 years?
Well, look, I would have to perhaps refer you to the Energy Minister in terms of the mix. But again, I re-emphasise that no state has done more in driving more renewable energy than Victoria. I mentioned the SEC before. Not only is the SEC back as an energy retailer for every government building with renewable energy, it's also made significant investments in two big projects, a solar farm near Horsham and the battery project in Plumpton, near the, I always call it the Calder BP, but anyway, I drive past it regularly. So we are doing more and more to move Victoria's energy mix to being more of a renewable focus with our investments in wind and solar. But again, we need gas to be part of that transition. It is undeniable that we need gas to be part of our transition, and we don't shy away from that.
Last month, The Age reported that Victoria had delayed its agreement with the Commonwealth to fully fund public schools. They reported that Victoria would now be providing 75% of school resourcing standard funding by 2031 instead of 2028 as previously agreed. Can you confirm for the committee what year will Victoria fund 75% of the SRS?
Well, in terms of the work we are doing, again, we have invested heavily in our government schools. I mentioned the $18 billion in infrastructure. We've also increased the recurrent expenditure, the operational investment in our government schools by 34% over the last decade. That's the most of any state or territory. And I'm really proud of that investment, both as Premier, but also as a parent who sends her kids to their local government schools. I see firsthand just how important, A, that investment is, B, how important every dollar of investment and where it goes in terms of the work that teachers and staff do, but also C, going back to something I said earlier, the purpose of public education is to ensure that no child misses out, regardless of income or background, that no child misses out. And I see that every single day in our government schools that I visit, and also like this morning when I was dropping my youngest off for their school camp. I see it every single day in terms of the difference that is made in kids' lives through our great government schools. So in terms of the work we're doing with the Commonwealth right now, we have, again, going back to the point about having a partner in Canberra, you may have noticed, you might recall, there was a bit of a battle over the past year between education ministers, and our Deputy Premier and Education Minister worked incredibly hard to ensure that the federal government, we got to the point where we did sign a heads of agreement with the Prime Minister in February of this year that gets us to that pathway of 100%. 100% of school resourcing between that mix of 75-25 between state and federal governments, and we've committed to deliver that across the life of the agreement. How these agreements work, they're signed at a high level, and then education ministers are working out the details of the bilateral agreement as to how we both together get to that outcome of 100%, 75% and 25% between federal and state.
So the question was about a specific year. Premier, are you refusing to confirm the year Victoria will fully fund schools under the SRS?
No, I'm not refusing to confirm. I'm saying that there's that was the purpose. I should have been more precise. That was the purpose of referring to the bilateral discussions that are going on between the education ministers, which again is consistent with how federal state agreements work. There was that broad heads of agreement that was signed that had both federal and state governments commit to that 100% outcome. How that is actioned, if you like, in the year by year, because both federal and state governments do have to both make additional investments to hit that 100% over the life of the agreement. How that is achieved is being informed by those bilateral, discussions that are going on between ministers, and I'm just not going to cut across those bilateral discussions because that would be a bit impolite to our negotiating partner.
So just to clarify, when it comes to these types of decisions, which is what I'm getting to with the question, does the buck stop with you?
I am the Premier, so I'm not sure what you're referring to.
The year that we reached 75%.
Yeah, well, again, I think I've just explained to you the process by which we jointly get to that 100% outcome of funding for our government schools, 75-25 shared between state and federal governments.
Premier, we know from your ministerial diaries that on 28 March you met with executives from Lockheed Martin at the Avalon Air Show. What did you speak about?
I spoke about the significant investment that they're making. I know there's no budget paper, Chair, reference, but I'm delighted to talk about it because our defence industry and our subsequent manufacturing and advanced manufacturing industry is such a big and important part of our state. Victoria is an international leader in terms of our advanced manufacturing sector being part of a global supply chain for the defence industry. And it's one of our key priorities in our economic growth statement that I mentioned earlier. And yes, I met with Lockheed Martin. I met with a number of companies that day, and that's one of the great benefits of having the Avalon Air Show. Can I say too, having the Land Forces Conference last year, these are conferences that bring big companies, global leaders who are making investment decisions here in Victoria that is about supporting jobs in our local supply chain. And that's what I spoke to the global leaders who were there from Lockheed Martin. They are looking at a range of opportunities here in Victoria. The reason why global companies like Lockheed Martin are looking at Victoria is because we have that international reputation. And that international reputation is built off the back of our strong and skilled workforce, people who go to work every single day, incredibly proud to work in our advanced manufacturing sector. And there's also other spin-offs too. And I'm actually, now that I'm recalling, I had many conversations that day, and one of them was, it really struck me, one of the defence industry representatives shared with me the observation that if, and you know, this might go to where your question is heading, if we are ultimately at times of conflict, at times countries are considering questions about sending their citizens off to defend their own country or other allies. Isn't it our obligation to make sure they have the best protection possible? And that I see in my own community with the production of the Bushmasters that are currently providing huge support to the Ukrainian community. Those Bushmasters are proudly made in Bendigo and are serving in that awful conflict in the Ukraine and are protecting people. That's why also, while we have a defence industry, it's as much to protect the people who go out to protect us, to be able to have discussions like this, to protect our democracy, to protect our opportunity to have, as members of Parliament, a free and flowing and peaceful engagement that is the envy of many, many nations around the world.
Thank you. Just moving on, currently the Treasurer is responsible for deciding the funding of Victoria's independent officers, like the Ombudsman, the IBAC Commissioner, who are responsible for oversight of the government of the day. So this then creates a conflict of interest. In a 2022 joint report, IBAC, Victorian Auditor General and the Ombudsman recommended establishing an independent tribunal to decide on the funding of integrity agencies. Last week, the IOC recommended you have another look at this recommendation. Should funding of integrity agencies be determined by the government they oversee or by an independent body?
So just to clarify, your earlier part of the question intimated that it was the Treasurer who was responsible for setting the budgets. It's actually a collective decision made by the Budget Committee of Cabinet that is ultimately then endorsed by Cabinet. So just to be precise in how those decisions are made, and there is no, I have no plans to change those arrangements.